Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on writing winning past performance narratives. Thank you for investing this time with us and our industry leaders. I'm Mallory Price and will facilitate today's session. As a reminder for APMP members, this webinar applies toward your continuing education units for certification. As with all Shipley webinars, this presentation will be uploaded to our website by tomorrow. We have two experts joining us today. Doug Reed is a certified senior instructor and currently serves as a Shipley trainer and manages all of Shipley's BD, capture, and proposals-related course design and development. Doug has more than 30 years of professional experience, including as a highly successful BD and capture and proposal professional. He has won a wide range of government contracts, ranging from multi-million-dollar federal contracts to small sole source awards. Doug also possesses extensive federal and state program project management experience. He was bid as key personnel and managed contracts ranging from an Office of Proposal Management program of study, preparing senior federal employees for senior executive service, to serving as the regional site lead for a Department of Labor contract, where he managed training for the client at 12 military installations nationwide. Prior to his experience as government contractor, Doug retired out of the U.S. Army as a first sergeant in the field of military intelligence, supporting the NSA for most of his military career. Doug holds a Bachelor of Arts from University of Maryland, a Certificate of Advanced Study postgraduate in Applied Data Science from Syracuse University, and a Master of Business Administration from Brandman University. Nia Mahalati is Vice President of Professional Services at Shipley Associates, which includes leading the Shipley Training Department. She is a U.S. Army veteran and Army Green to Gold Scholarship recipient. Nia is also the previous Chief of Party and Field Program Manager for Department of State-funded programs in Afghanistan. She was a contract training instructor for the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. She also has extensive experience working for numerous small, mid-cap, and large government contracting firms, including service as Director of Professional Services at Vectrus and Centel Corporation. Senior Capture Management Professional at Kinetic US, Nia serves as founder and owner of a successful EDWOSB 8M and VOSB BD that participated in two successful mentor-protege agreements and held numerous contracts as both a prime and subcontractor. She was an adjunct graduate school law professor at Webster University for 5 years. She successfully led large teams both domestically and overseas in training, business development, capture management proposals on $100 million plus contracts, and in contract and program management. Nia is fluent in written and spoken Dari and Farsi, Tajik, French, and English. She has a fluent Juris Doctorate from the University of Georgia School of Law, received her bachelor's degree at Vanderbilt University, and is a Master Training of Trainers instructor. Thank you both for sharing your wisdom with you today. We are so excited to hear what you have to say about past performance. All right, so a little bit about Shipley. Shipley is a global professional services firm. We do business development training and certification, proposal management, writing and response management services, end-to-end proposal support and consulting, capture and sales and pursuit management consulting. We also do training, including these webinars, industry insights, blogs, and we have many guidebooks and playbooks. So there's just a little bit about Shipley. But let's get into our agenda for today. First, we'll go over an introduction. What is past performance? How does the government use it? How does government verify past performance? And specific criteria. And then we'll go into 5 steps to develop compelling past performance, including ensuring compliance, relevant programs, drafting compelling narrative, quantifiable data, and those clarifying questions. Then we'll go into some final notes and some Q&A. So Nia, can you introduce us to past performance, what it is, and just introduce us to it?
Sure, Mallory. Thank you for that introduction. So past performance is the government's evaluation criteria. We have 4 volumes usually, depending on the solicitation and the way that it's broken out. It's opportunity and agency specific, but it normally consists of a management volume, a technical volume, a cost volume, and past performance either weaved into the management or as a separate volume. The reason the government uses past performance is because they are risk adverse. If we look at the clauses in the FAR throughout, and although with an understanding that not all agencies use the FAR, they have agency specific regulations, but consistent with that, you will see that the government is risk adverse, meaning that they want reduced risk, they want continuity of services, transition risk for new contractors, changing up from incumbency to new contractors, or even from previous incumbency to the new contract is what they're concerned about. They want to make sure that there is continuity of services, that the contractor has provided these services in the past that are relevant in size, scope, and complexity. And one of the ways that they do that is by evaluating past performance, meaning, did the contractor do this in the past? How well did they do it? Did they manage risk? And, is it worth it for the government to spend their funding on a best value contract for a contractor? Can they show that they clearly carried at least 51% of this contract as a prime? And did they manage their subcontractors successfully? So that's essentially what past performance is, what it entails, and why the government uses it as evaluation criteria.
And so I know a lot of people are going to ask, what is the difference between past performance and relevant corporate experience?
Yeah, so past performance, usually the way that it's written in a solicitation, in a request for a proposal, RFP, it is an experience or contract, an opportunity that the contractor has specifically worked on fairly recently or currently. It's normally within the past 3 to 5 years on federal opportunities. The government normally does ask for the contracting officer's name, email address, or the POC, the government POC for that contract. They verify that information as part of their evaluation process. That's what the source selection committee does. And they ask for the contract number. They verify through past performance questionnaires or CPARs. And then there is a statement of work section that they ask for, with whether it be through a written response from the contractor in narrative or as part of the previous solicitation documents of that contractor's past performance, for us to upload to demonstrate to the government that this was indeed a formal contract that the contractor, actually implemented work on at least for 6 months usually. So it's a formal citation, more so with formal requirements that they evaluate. Relevant corporate experience usually can consist of things like personal experience of the employees, perhaps at previous companies, at the current company, but not necessarily on a formal contract per se. It can include corporate experience that is maybe, implemented on commercial client work. It's a lot more flexible in terms of what you can provide. But formal past performance citations are a little bit more stringent in terms of the requirements and the evaluation criteria.
Awesome, thank you. Do you have any other advice on the government use of past performance?
Well, the government is required per the FAR to verify past performance when they ask for it. There are numerous sections of the FAR that deal with past performance. We obviously don't have the time to get into all of those sections right now because they're complicated, but the key here is that the requirements are listed in the solicitation, usually in federal contracts. It'll be in the RFP section L, will be the requirement to the contractor, and the evaluation criteria will be in section M. If they are evaluating past performance, they are required to tell the contractor how they're going to evaluate it in section M. And so that we want to make sure that we are staying consistent with the requirements of both Section L and M to make sure that we make compliance, but that we also submit a citation or citations that are compelling, that are going to win that contract for us.
Excellent, thank you. Doug, can you take the next couple of slides for us and talk us through them?
Thanks. As Nia just stated, once an RFP drops for an opportunity, we look for the requirements outlined in sections L and M for the solicitation, determine the exact past performance requirements and how the government will evaluate it. Section L should list the number of past performance citations required, the maximum allowable time range since completion of the past performance, and sometimes even the format for the individual citations. Some RFPs will even provide a 1 or 2 page pre-formatted form as an attachment to be used to input each past performance citation. Section M tells us that the past performance how it will be scored and evaluated. That said, past business development leads should verify past performance as part of qualifying an opportunity and determining an initial probability to win early in the BD capture process. Qualifying the opportunity will also include a gap analysis to determine the company's gaps against the opportunity's known requirements and based on their verifiable past performance with similar contracts. This gap analysis can be used to also determine teaming requirements and other factors that affect compliance with the solicitation. Section M of a solicitation will include guidance on how the government will evaluate the past performance for the bid. Some RFPs, more common for LPTA or lowest price technical acceptable contracts, the government may simply want to see a citation narrative along with a contract name, contract number, and contracting officer's name and contact information. Another simplified method is a requirement to copy and paste the PWS or SAL tasks into the past performance narrative to show alignment with the current solicitation requirements. For most competitive opportunities, the government will pull the contractor's CPAR or Contract Performance Assessment Report for all prime contract past performance. When CPARs are unavailable, the government may provide an opportunity-specific past performance questionnaire as an attachment to the solicitation. These PPQs will be filled out by the government POC for the contract on a specific past performance where the bidder served as a prime contractor. For past performance as a subcontractor, the PPQ must be filled out by the contract representative of the prime contractor. Whether CPARs or PPQ, common evaluation areas include quality of products or service, schedule, cost control, except for fixed price contracts, and contract management. If the CPARs system contains more than one CPAR for a specific contract, the government will normally score only the latest CPARs available for that opportunity. For any contract over 365 days, the government may provide an initial CPARs anytime after the base year. As a capture manager, I would normally talk with the project manager for each contract at the end of the base year of a multi-year contract. We discuss and identify any completed contract deliverables, positive metrics, and discriminators that will affect a good CPARs rating. I'll then meet with the contract staff to officially request an initial CPARs at the completion of the base year of the contract. This allows us to then use CPARs instead of having to get a opportunity-specific PPQ every time that we want to use that past performance in the future. Lastly, no matter the required format of past performance, the government may make calls to former customers to interview and ask questions about a company's past performance. Next slide.
Thanks, Doug. Can you walk us through the first step of ensuring compliance with past performance?
Sure. There are 5 main steps to developing compelling past performance. Step 1 is to ensure compliance. Developing a compliance matrix is one of the first steps of proposal planning that is conducted once a final RFP drops. As part of developing a compliance matrix, ensure you include past performance specific compliance requirements outlined in sections L and M. When the government provides a specific past performance template, it is often page constrained. You'll need to ensure you show compliance with the limited space available. Not every individual past performance needs to show every task in the PWS, but when combined, every task should be represented in at least one of the possible past performance citations. Redundancy of successful past performance on critical tasks will often be seen favorably by evaluators as mitigating the risk of unsuccessful performance. If the government does not provide a template for past performance citations and accompanying narratives, create a compliant template that is consistent and repeatable. The government should be able to quickly look at any citation and see the relevant data in the same place for each citation. When space is available, consider using a meatball chart for each citation, showing how a specific past performance complies with the requirements in the solicitation. If the individual meatball charts are not feasible, for example, when the solicitation has a pre-formatted template, consider rolling up the meatball chart of the past performance in the introduction to the past performance volume or the introduction to the individual citations. This combined chart will show each citation and how they complies with the requirements, and also shows redundancy among the combined past performance. Nia, can you walk us through the example of the past performance citation?
Sure. So if you look at this past performance citation here that we've provided as an example, we have the customer's information, we have the program POC. These are the criteria that the government usually asks for. That's why we've included them. The period of performance, meaning the government will specify whether it's the total contract period of performance or if it's the period of performance that the contractor actually performed, which are 2 different things. So those are one of the things that we want to ask in advance of the government, preferably before the RFP drops. There's nothing wrong with asking the government questions prior to the RFP dropping. As a matter of fact, that will give us a significant advantage most of the time. The FAR does restrict our communications with the government after the RFP drops. That's actually stated in the FAR. So the best time to try to get ahead of this, if we can, is during the capture phase, whether it's sources sought, market research, RFI, draft RFP period, and ask some of these questions. One would be, is the period of performance the amount of time that we specifically as a contractor performed on the contract, or is it for the entire duration of the contract, if it's, for instance, a vehicle, an IDIQ vehicle? And they'll answer that question. We are also putting on there the contract number. That's the number that the government has issued on that contract so they can go back and verify it. The contract value, that's another question we want to ask the government. This can impact our solicitation and how favorably our citation is viewed. If it's total contract value, it's the amount, the ceiling amount that the government has allocated to that contract, whether it's single award or if it's a multiple award IDIQ. If it's the value of the services the contractor specifically performed, that may be a significantly different value. So these are some of the questions that we want to answer, which is why we as Shipley are providing this form so that contractors, it can help them in advance align their capture and ask the questions from the government that they need to ask. And then we've added, were we the prime or the subcontractor as the performing contractor? We talk about a project summary, which is not what the project simply did or what we did, but how is it relevant to what's being bid. One of the things that the Shipley emphasizes the most, and we emphasize the most in our organization and trying to help others, is we really need to speak to how things are relevant to the government, their mission, their agency, that we have an understanding of their organization, their as is versus their to be, and how we're going to help the government get there. So when we say project summary, we're not necessarily talking about what did we simply do on the contract, but how is it relevant to what the government's trying to do on this particular solicitation that we're bidding. We then break out the past performance citation narrative into tasks as they are consistent with the statement of work of the current solicitation. So if the PWS task 1, whatever that's stating, that's what we state here. We state the subtasks. We speak to how we performed these tasks in the past on this particular contract, and again, how it's relevant to the current solicitation. We go through and we do that for each task to the extent that we have room to do so. Here we want to quantify that data. We teach this significantly in our government contracting training courses, whether it be the capture course, the boot camp course, or the writing and management of proposals. We talk about quantifying the data, and that means that we have actual metrics. We're not just saying that we're a great contractor and then signing into the call box and saying that we said it as the contractor. We preferably want to get that information from the contracting officer. So the key here is to quantify what we're stating above, right? And that's why we put that in there: notable achievements, call out boxes, customer appraisals. That's how we create discriminators between ourselves and our competition on contracts, is to provide that data and quantify. And then if there were issues and mitigation strategies, what we say at Shipley is we don't want to ignore those, because the chances are the government's going to find out about them when they verify. So what we want to do here is address those things and state this is how we mitigated it. If we came onto the contract, there was already, this is an example, a 20% backlog of work that needed to be done. We mitigated it. We put in a plan, deliverable schedules, and we addressed that. We exceeded the schedule, and then we resolved the backlog issue and we moved on. So here it's called ghosting, right? We're getting out in front of the issue, we're presenting it, and then we're presenting our mitigation strategy and how we resolved it. So this is a proactive strategy in terms of writing strong past performance citations. And then you just take that back down to how did that achieve the customer's program requirements, and how can the team assist the client in meeting or exceeding their mission requirements on this particular opportunity. When we don't have a template from the government, we suggest that the contractor uses something similar to this in terms of writing a compelling citation to submit into their past performance volume.
Awesome. Thank you, Nia and Doug. So Nia, could you walk us through the next 3 steps, steps 2, 3, and 4?
Sure. So when we're looking at past performance, one of the experiences that we've seen at Shipley, and that we as professionals have seen prior to even joining Shipley when we were in industry, is the difference, what makes for compelling past performance versus compliant. So we definitely wanted to make sure that we covered this in the seminar because it's so important. And we see this question asked over and over in our training sessions and in our consulting and even within our past lives as contractors. It's not enough on a best value contract to provide a compliant past performance citation or volume, because chances are some of our competition is doing the same thing. So to strategically position ourselves to get a higher score, to potentially get that outstanding that far exceeds the valuation from the government, what we want to do is make sure that we're meeting not just the size, the scope, and the complexity of the current opportunities requirements, but that we are exceeding those. So we want to pick, knowing that the government asks for past performance within the past 3 or 5 years with similar size, scope, and complexity, we want to select the citations that are stronger potentially than the current opportunity. So to give an example, if we have a $50 million opportunity with 7 tasks on it, it would make more sense if we had that kind of past performance, where as a prime, we had a $100 million contract with 14 tasks that were similar. That exceeds potentially, depending on the opportunity and the contract we previously held, the size standard. That's the obvious part, but not the so obvious part is the complexity. That's one of the things that we can try to make stronger. It's not just the scope. Yes, we performed these 7 tasks, but to what extent did we perform them and how similar are they to this opportunity? I know that in our training, a lot of participants ask, well, what if we don't have that? Well, that's where teaming strategies come in. That's not to say that we're going to use our subcontractors' past performance, but these are some of the things that we want to look at during the capture phase. What's going to place us at an advantage over our competition? Do we need to go get a contractor that has a larger contract with larger size and scope, maybe use 2 of our prime past performance citations as the prime on this opportunity, and then the subcontractors that exceeds, so we can bring that balance to the table. So that's what compelling really means, is to exceed, right, the current opportunities requirements. We can get very creative and capture when we're trying to do that if we have enough time and we plan accordingly. So here, in order to do that, we're going to create a team capabilities assessment. That's usually something that we send out to potential teaming partners. When we're doing that, we want to ask the teaming partners specifically about how many FTEs, full-time employees, they had on the contract, how long did they perform on the contract, did they perform as a prime or a sub, on how many tasks, to what extent, before we select our teaming partners and solidify those teaming agreements, because we don't want to bring on teaming partners and then determine that they only did, they only performed on this contract 8 years ago with 2 full-time employees for 2 months, because that's not going to get us to where we're going to be at a compelling volume or citation. So essentially, we're taking these 3 components of size, scope, and complexity, and we're doing analysis and overall team. How do we exceed the requirements on those 3 criteria for this current opportunity? So here, what we want to do when doing that, take into consideration, where are we going to get our strongest government evaluations? Those are going to be reviewed potentially by the client. Like Doug mentioned, the government will most likely pull CPARs. They have, on the large efforts, especially Department of Defense, recently have added an evaluation criteria called small business participation. That is a formal evaluation criteria on most CPARs for DoD. If we're bidding unrestricted, full and open on large opportunities, that now is about 30 to 35% is the requirement for DoD. So if we have contracts that we can demonstrate where we successfully manage small businesses, if we are a large bidding full and open, and we provided that kind of work, 30 to 35% to various set-aside standards for small businesses, that would be a plus. For research and development, prototyping contracts, we don't always get exceptionals, because sometimes it's the first time we were creating something. And so we just need to make sure that we know what those government evaluations are going to look like in advance. One of those strategies that we can use is to reach out to the contracting officer for that opportunity during the capture phase, see if they're still in place, see if they're willing to support our solicitation in terms of providing a favorable write-up for us. These are all things we can do during the capture phase to help ourselves, to align ourselves for success, to get out in front of our competition. So we want to make sure that POC is still in place. They're not going to be on paid time off. They can evaluate us if they're going to write a past performance questionnaire. If not, we want to get a hold of that CPAR and see what our previous reviews look like. Now, having said that, there are some classified contracts, those of us who came out of the Intel community space, where that client doesn't provide formal past performance because the work is classified. So if that's the case, it would be imperative at this time in capture to get out in front of that, determine if that agency is going to provide us with a write-up and not, and if not, how do we address that, right? So here, in terms of writing a compelling narrative, for us, compelling would, as contractors, mean that number one, we're being compliant. That's the most important thing, because one of the easiest ways for the government to essentially disqualify contractors is through compliance, right? Because they're so concerned with protests, and compliance is something that can be protested potentially less than other elements. So we just need to make sure we create, like Doug said, that compliance matrix in advance based off of solicitation specific requirements in section L, M, and potentially in other places in the RFP, depending on the opportunity. We then want to organize our narrative so that it's written to that client specifically. We don't want to take a citation from, that we've previously had in the past and just submit that. We want to tailor it to this opportunity. The way that we do that is by taking this opportunity task by task and writing how that contract, those tasks were relevant, and they were the same ones with the same level of complexity that we completed and or are currently performing on this contract, and how they are relevant to not only this customer's opportunity and task, but to their long-term mission, where they want to get and how we're going to help them get there. That's ultimately what the government wants to see. So that's what compelling, that's how we quantify compelling. So here, when we're trying to define those elements, we talk about data and quantifying. So here, some examples of that would be the number of full-time employees that worked on the contract, the labor categories, who, what, when, how did they do it? Did we have, if it's a systems engineering opportunity, did we have, how many systems engineers? What did they accomplish? How is it similar to the current contract? What was the impact of the work that we performed, not just on the program, but also on the overall customer's long-term goals? We expressly state, meaning in writing, how that work was performed and how and why it's relevant to the current solicitation. So here, when we're evaluating our own past performance volume as part of our color team reviews, we want to look at the government's evaluation criteria in section M and evaluate it through the lens of the government, not just through our lens as the contractor. We probably already know how we performed on that contract. The government will only have the information that we have provided them with in addition to what they're able to verify. So here, if we did a color team review prior to submittal where we use the government's criteria to evaluate, that would help us out significantly. So that's the fourth step there. See, so here we talk about quantifiable data. We can't emphasize this enough because it separates us from our competition. If we're stating that we're the right contractor in the right place at the right time, that's not much for the government to go by. If we're stating that we did X amount of work with X amount of employees in a certain amount of time, we saved the government 2 years of work and we saved them 35% in cost savings, right there in that sentence, potentially we may have picked up 2 or 3 points as far as source selection committee evaluation criteria. That is what is going to distinguish us and differentiate us from our competition. So here, knowing that the attention span of the reader going through potentially a lot of proposals, it may be a little bit shorter. What we want to do is break up that text into call out boxes, into charts, features and benefits, and provide different ways to show the client that we actually have that quantifiable data with the numbers, and this is going to put the source selection committee at ease in terms of mitigation of risk, which is ultimately what they're looking for on their current contract. when we are doing things like writing out call out boxes, we preferably want to have the contracting officer or the government's quotes versus our own, because again, that's a piece of quantifiable data. So here, one of the things that we suggest is Shipley is if we have program managers on the ground, if it's a current contract that we're running that we are using as past performance, we get our program management team to talk to that contracting officer, get a current quote. It doesn't have to be formal. It's what we call kudos in the industry, right? And we put a date. We don't necessarily have to put that program contracting officer's name. We can just put the title. And this is just an example of how we strengthen our past performance citations, if the government is willing to do that. Again, it's agency specific, it's opportunity specific, it's contract specific. So we have to work around what we currently have.
Great, thank you, Nia. Doug, can you walk us through step?
You still there?
Yes, sorry, Doug, could you walk us through step 5? I think I accidentally muted myself.
Okay. Sure. So step 5, ask the government clarification questions. But the last step in compelling past performance is to ask clarification questions to the government. When conducting capture on an opportunity, one of the key considerations prior to the final RFP is to determine past performance requirements. A company's ability to bid will often come down to whether we have relevant, compliant, and compelling past performance. Federal contractors need to look at their available past performance, the availability of CPARs for past performance as a prime, and or their ability to receive PPQs in a timely manner. If there's ambiguity regarding past performance in sections L and M, ensure you ask for clarification during the Q&A at the final RFP. I have seen solicitations with an attached past performance template that was unfillable or that did not include required fields. Ensure you clarify any discrepancies or issues with the template that limits your ability to provide a compliant and compelling past performance. The government wants a past performance that shows your ability to complete the required tasks and manage risk. Next slide. So some of the final tips. If an opportunity is a recompete, the government will often use the RFP as a prior solicitation as a mask for the following opportunity. Plan to use the requirements of this old RFP as a planning tool until the government provides an update. For a new opportunity, start determining your past performance requirements as soon as you get a draft statement of work or a list of requirements. If no guidance is provided for past performance early in the government's acquisition planning, plan for a typical past performance response requiring the 3 past performances within the last 3 to 5 years. Do not be afraid to ask for past performance guidance. Determine your gaps early and leverage teammates with relevant past performance and strong capabilities with verifiable discriminators in tasks and areas where you have gaps. The end goal is to have at least one discriminator for each task in the PWS. Pay particular attention to the government's requirements for past performance. Often, other bidders will also request clarification for past performance and could even make suggestions to the government to limit past performance, either during capture or in the final Q&A. Next slide.
Okay, actually, before we move on, Nia, did you have any final tips for success before we move on to a Q&A session?
Sure, thanks for asking, Mallory. And that tip always revolves around what's on the bottom of the slide right now, which is always set the highest bar for your team. We teach in all of our proposal related and capture related training courses how the government formally evaluates every single volume in a proposal to include the past performance volume. They do have some discretion on that, but and we've had that verified by contracting officers who have sat on source selection committees recently. But in a nutshell, even if we're bidding lowest price technically acceptable, where it's, you know, essentially lowest price and then technically, we still want to try to position ourselves for having a high bar as far as the past performance is concerned, and not just saying we meet the requirements, but that we are either going to be evaluated as outstanding or far exceeds in comparison to our competition. So one of the things that we can do to strengthen that position before submittal is to do a competitive analysis. Just like we would do a black hat on our competition overall in capture, we would do a past performance specific black hat, which would essentially be, here are our top competitors if we have time to do this, and this is the contracts that we think they're going to use as past performance. Now, if they're an incumbent, that kind of tells you they're going to use their current work. There are ways of gathering this information. We do teach that in our training as well, but some of the easier ways are that there are subscription databases such as GovWin that tell us who's likely to bid given their past performance. That's not just naming who's interested in bidding, but there are ways to do that. And we can look at what we think our competition is going to bid and where we will score potentially in comparison to what our competition is bidding. These are not opportunities, especially for best value, where we're bidding in a silo. How well we do on scoring really has to do with how well our competition does. So if we don't analyze the competition, we won't be able to get an objective criteria. So here, what would help us out in capture is if we did a black hat that's past performance specific, as it would apply to our potential competitors. That would help us out, and always trying to score up in the top outstanding or far exceeds, trying to position our team as a whole to try to get the strongest citations in advance, and having communications with the government as far as their expectations in advance, if possible, prior to the RFP dropping, so that we can clarify the requirements and position ourselves for that win.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for all of your input. So we had a few questions come in during the presentation. Doug, I'm going to pose this first one to you, and Nia, of course, if you have any other things you'd like to add, please do. So Doug, have you heard of any bad experiences with past performance, and how were they mitigated?
Sure. So during one of our recent workshops, one of the participants brought forth a question regarding past performance. They had they were working on a proposal. They thought they had a high P-win, and about a week and a half prior to the submission date, Q&A came back, and they had used one of their past performances was as a subcontractor. When the Q&A came forward, they no longer, it required that all past performance be prime past performance, which means that they weren't no longer compliant. In the end, the person stated that they had to no bid the opportunity, and they asked what they could do to mitigate some of that in the future. And as a capture manager, one of my responsibilities is to take a look at our past performance. We figure out our teaming partners, what past performance we're going to have. If we need to use subcontractor past performance or a teaming partner's past performance to meet compliance, talk to the client early in the process before the RFP drops. Make sure you get buy-in, the fact that you can use whatever past performance is required, and that way it's not going to jump out at last minute and make you non-compliant.
Excellent. Thank you. Nia, did you have anything to add to that?
No, we've heard that in our workshops consistently, where the requirements come out and it's requiring the prime to carry essentially 2 of the past performance citations out of the 3 potentially. The reason the government does that is because as a prime contractor, we are required to demonstrate that we're carrying 51% of that work at least. If it's a small business requirement, it's important that the government knows that that small business is capable of carrying that 51%. That is why we should anticipate that the government is going to position their evaluation criteria on those standards. Can this contractor carry this contract? Because again, it's a risk issue. So we should position ourselves in a way where we have the anticipation that that's going to be the government requirement, but then go and ask the government if they're willing to consider other options such as team past performance of subcontractors, subcontractor past performance from the prime and or from the subs, and see if they're willing to be a little bit more accommodating in terms of their evaluation criteria. But a lot of times when they do what Doug just mentioned is because they are trying to mitigate risk and demonstrate that this is the tried and tested vendor of choice that essentially has carried this in the past. They were able to manage themselves as a prime, the contract, the government's expectations, and their subcontractors. And it's not just to show that we're able to do so for 51% of the contract. We want to position ourselves to show that we're able to do it 100% plus time on all of our contracts. So if we have that view and we consistently operate in our capture and our proposal writing aligned with that view, we're going to carry this thing at 110%. That's what we need to aim for, showing and demonstrating. That's going to put us in a good position for a win.
Great, thank you. Doug, I'm going to pose this next question to you first as well. Can you use individual past performance in lieu of a company's past performance?
For that question, the short answer is no. You have to use formal past performance. They're going to look for a PPQ or a CPAR from the government for your official past performance. If you want to weave something like that into the citation, it's going to be seen as a risk. I'm sure Nia can add further to that, but bottom line, you can't use a person's individual past performance as past performance for the solicitation.
Thanks, Doug. Nia, did you have anything to add?
If a contractor is considering doing that, the best thing to do is ask the government that question during the capture phase and get a clear answer as to whether that's acceptable or not. When we talk about individual past performance, like Doug said, we're referring to an individual. Formal past performance citation requires a contract number. That contract number is the contract number that the government issued to that company, not necessarily that individual. So if that individual conducted those tasks under the auspices of the contractor that they currently work for, and it was conducted within the stipulations in consistency with the stipulations of the RFP within the past 3 or 5 years or whatever the RFP is asking, then yes, it can be used, but it has to be done under the auspices of the company's performance as allocated as such by the government with a contract number. So in those cases, the best thing to do, if we're not sure, is to ask that question in advance to make sure that we don't cause a compliance issue when submitting a citation if we're not sure. So, but like Doug said, it's normally the company's past performance, not an individual's, unless it falls under the auspices of that company.
Great, thank you. Nia, you've already touched on this. This is our last question that we have time for. But the question is, what if the contracting officer doesn't give past performance?
So if a company has conducted the work, they have the contract number, and the customer, for whatever reason, is stating that they're not going to write a past performance questionnaire and or provide, verification of that work. And we've seen that happen a lot. It happens in intelligence community contracts, like we mentioned, because it's classified. We want to ask the government in advance. There's also been instances where participants of our workshops have told us that the company has gone back and asked that same contracting officer for so many references that it becomes a little bit difficult for the government to continue to respond to these, which makes sense. So we want to, again, get out in front of that, ask during the capture phase reach out to the contracting officer and say, we plan on using this specific contract for past performance for a current opportunity. Are you willing to respond and give us a favorable response, and try to line that up so that, like Doug said, we're not surprised and blindsided when that RFP drops and we may have a 3-week to a 5-week term, potentially less. And then we have to go and look for additional past performance, a contracting officer who will provide us with a favorable citation and or a teammate who has it. Because what we're doing when that happens is we're cutting time short, which is then going to potentially reduce our P-win on that opportunity. So again, preparation is everything for past performance, just like it is for some of the other components of submitting successful proposals to RFPs. So I think it's just as important, the planning part of it, to collaborate this with the contracting officer in advance to determine whether or not you're going to get that favorable verification of your contract work.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for providing your expertise, and thank you all of you who participated in this presentation. We hope you have an enjoyable rest of your day. Thank you everyone so much.